Hey guys, GameoTalk here, and welcome back to another Borderlands 3 build video. So, today we are going to be covering my melee Amara build, which is basically invincible, honestly. If you have the right gear and you're using the right skills, you honestly should never even go into fight for your life. So, basically, we're going to be running over the skills, the gear, the anointed passives you're going to want to be looking out for some of your gear, because I don't have those specific passives on specific gear. But then also, I'm going to be, at the end, showing you some Mayhem 2 or Mayhem 3 boss fights, showing off the build and how it works. So, with that, let's jump right into the skills. Alright, so just like last time, I'm going to be kind of grazing over the skills that are doing most of the heavy lifting in this build. So if you kind of want to copy the build, definitely just pause the video. With that, we're going to start with kind of the health sustain skills first, which Clarity basically just gives you constant health regen, and after you use an action skill, it is doubled. This is going to, especially early game, going to be helping you out heal most damage thrown your way. But also with it, Samsara. So when you deal damage with your action skill, you add a stack of Samsara, and for every stack of Samsara, you gain gun damage and health regeneration. So Samsara mixed with Clarity, you're getting a lot of health regeneration, and like I said, in the early game and even mid-game, you're going to be out healing a lot of damage thrown your way, to the point where you don't even feel the damage. You're actually healing while taking damage. It's pretty crazy strong, and it carried me, for the most part, through True Vault Hunter mode. But then also, you're going to want Root to Rise, just so that way you can increase your max health. And basically, the health regen on Samsara is based on your max health, so 5% of your max health per stack, and you can have 5 stacks. So 25% of your max health is a really good health regeneration. And obviously, the more max health you have, the higher your regeneration is going to be in terms of flat numbers. So then Helping Hands is also going to be extremely helpful. Basically, after you use an action skill, you gain damage reduction up to 40% for 15 seconds, which is really good because in this build, you're going to have a lot of action skill cooldown. So you're going to have that damage reduction almost the entire time until your action skill comes back up. And you're going to want to keep spamming your action skill with this build. Then the big one here is Find Your Center. You gain increased melee damage, and you gain even more melee range after using an action skill. This is going to be your big important skill here. And as you can see, my class mod's putting an extra point in here. And you're going to want to get the class mod as quick as possible. I think I said action skills putting a point in here. I meant class mod. That's my bad. Sorry about that. But then another thing to highlight here, all 4 of these points are actually from my class mod, but you don't necessarily need this skill, but it does help a little bit. Jab Cross, basically when you deal melee damage, you gain action skill damage and increased gun damage. This is actually going to be really helpful in a moment when we get to the gear. I'll explain why. But then Blitz is just basically execute from 0 if you played Borderlands 2. If you're close enough, if you're a certain distance from an enemy, you'll be able to dash towards them. But also it does increase your melee damage. So that is it for the Brawl tree. This is going to, like I said, these 4 skills are going to be your main survivability. And these 3 here are going to be where most of your melee damage is coming from. But then all we really need in Mystical Assault is Restless, which just gives you cooldown. Then Soul Sap is going to be super helpful. Doesn't matter if you're going phase cast, phase slam, or phase grasp. You're going to want Soul Sap because it is it heals you basically when you deal action skill damage. But then also Ascendant is boosting that by an extra 20%, giving you 50% of the damage dealt by your action skill is returned to you as health. But that's basically it in Mystical Assault. And then we move on over to Fist of the Elements. The only major thing you need here is Illuminated Fist, which just basically your melee attacks are deal action skill element, which is different depending on the situation. Obviously, you're going to want to change the element of your action skill depending on your situation between shock, fire, or corrosive. But whatever you have it equipped as, see, I have mine as fire right now, so all my melee attacks would be doing bonus fire damage. So, but then also it does, as you can see, increase your melee damage even more. But that is it for the skills. Actually, the skills do a lot of the heavy lifting, but the gear is going to be doing even more of the heavy lifting for this build. So let's jump on over to the build. All right, so moving on to gear, as we covered in the last video, for anointed bonuses, you need to be holding the gun to get them. However, some of the guns that we have equipped here, basically the Trevinator and the Duck, you don't need those guns, but you want to kind of keep a lookout for the passives that they have. Simply just because they're extremely helpful. So if you can get it on like your grenade mod or your shield, it's going to go a long way for sure. So the Duck, for example, you don't need the Duck. In fact, the Duck is doing nothing for this build. But the anointed passive is on action skill end, melee damage is increased by 100% for a short time. If you can get this on your shield, you're set. You're golden. This is going to go a long way. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it on a shield. I farmed for hours, and I couldn't get one on a particular shield. I was being a little picky. But next, we have the Trevinator here. Again, you don't need the Trevinator, but after using Phase Slam, your melee damage is increased by 200% for a short time. You're going to want to try and get this as well, either on a shield or a grenade, whatever it gives you. Or even your weapon, if you get it on the face puncher, that'll be helpful. But the one I have on my face puncher is, in my opinion, better, just because we'll explain in a moment. But then the Psycho Stabber, it's a pretty easy gun to farm. You get it early in the early game, but basically it's going to be 120% increased melee damage. It's going to extremely help, but like I said, this is mainly for your early game. It'll help in the late game, but I prefer the face puncher. So moving on to the face puncher. My face puncher has, after using phase cast, weapon damage is increased by 250% for a short time. Now, that sounds useless because, as I'm sure everybody knows, the face puncher actually deals melee damage. Its damage is determined by your melee damage, not your gun damage. However, after doing some testing, I learned that it still counts as weapon damage. It doesn't count as gun damage, but as weapon damage. So after using phase cast, you actually do still get this bonus, which is extremely helpful, and the numbers jack up quite a bit. And you're going to be using the face puncher primarily for healing. If you need to back off from a boss because maybe they're laying too much damage into you and you don't feel comfortable, back off from the boss, use the gun, shoot them up a bit, and you'll heal. Now, you're probably asking, how are you healing? Basically, we have a Knife Drain White Elephant. This is probably the most perfect relic I could have gotten on this build simply because it has 75% lifesteal, but also it's a white elephant. Basically, the white elephant, you have a 30% chance on melee attacks to apply sticky bombs. And yes, that 30% chance does apply to every pellet the face puncher shoots. So you're going to see that in the boss fight later in the video, that the sticky bombs will be getting applied to the bosses. And really just the face puncher is the biggest thing in this build. And so, yeah. And like I said, this also, because it does melee damage, you're going to be healing just by shooting enemies with it from the lifesteal. But then next, you can do one of two shields. Personally, I prefer the Rough Rider, just because it does bring more damage reduction on top of your helping hand skill. But then also, mine specifically is on action skill end, 30% damage taken is returned to the attacker for a short time. This just helps reduce some more damage, but also increases your max health, so Samsara can be healing you even more. So realistically, this part is a choice. You can either go the Rough Rider and be picky and try and get this specific anointed. I got really lucky with this one. Or you can go the Ward. The only problem with the Ward is you got to kind of maintain it and make sure it stays down, although that is pretty easy to keep down in Mayhem. But basically the Ward, you just deplete it, you get 300% increased melee damage, and yeah, it's just absolutely amazing. And it increases your weapon damage by 25%. So you're actually getting 325% increased damage on the face puncher when your shield is depleted with the Ward. It's absolutely amazing. Now, I use the Ward for the bigger bosses like Tyrene and Grave Ward, but if I'm up in basically, if I'm using the face puncher, I'll be using the ward. However, if I'm up in an enemy's face like Traunt, I'll be using the Rough Rider because they are just going to be laying into me a lot if I'm up in their face, so I want as much damage reduction as possible, whereas bigger bosses like Tyrene and Grave Ward, it's easier to dodge their attacks, so you don't need that damage reduction nearly as badly. But then also the class mod, the Rope-a-Dope Breaker. Basically, this is putting a point into Find Your Center, which is giving me an extra 100% melee damage. There's no reason you shouldn't have this class mod on this build. But also, Amara gains damage reduction. This bonus is increased depending on the distance from your enemy. The closer to the enemy, the greater the bonus. So you can get an extra 29% increased damage reduction. This class mod is specifically good for if you're up in an enemy's face, just beating them down, punching them like crazy. So that extra 29% damage reduction plus the 23% from the Rough Rider and then plus the damage reduction from Helping Hands, you are taking barely any damage. So yeah, but that is it for the gear. So if you have any further questions, definitely leave a comment down below. But thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and definitely head on over to my Twitch channel, seeing as that's where I make most of my content creation. The link will be in the description below, and enjoy the Mayhem 3 boss battles.